The Joe Rogan Experience.
And then there's the moon.
And then the moon's weird too.
The moon's really weird.
The moon's super weird.
The size of the moon directly corresponding, like when it's in orbit with the sun, completely blocks out the sun perfectly.
It's 1/400th the size of the sun, and it's 400 times closer to the Earth than the sun. You never see the dark side, which is very weird. It's actually, I believe it's closer to the Earth than what you would normally expect for a moon.
And it's huge.
It's huge. You have cultures actually talking about a pre-moon period and it's stabilizing the climate. You have the Zulu cultures talking about this. And then here's the weirdest stuff about the moon. Apollo 11, I believe, when the booster took off on the moon, they were like, "Oh, we think it might be hollow," and it's it seems like actually the outer layer of the moon is less dense. Or sorry, is more dense than lower layers, which pattern matches only to an excavation site. That's obviously, in Earth, the lower you go, it's more dense, right? And so Apollo 12, they intentionally crashed the booster of the lunar vehicle onto the moon. They put seismometers there, and they said that it rang like a bell. This is all fact. You could look all this stuff. It's super weird.
It is really weird. I know you did an episode about that with Randall Carlson.
Love Randall Carlson.
Yeah. He's got some wild fucking theories too. But the idea that the moon was somehow another place there to stabilize our atmosphere is so crazy.
It is crazy. And then you obviously have to sort of think in probabilities all the way down. Lowest probability, craziest thing is Ingo Swann, who is another remote viewer in the Stargate program. He wrote a book called Penetration, where he's basically like abducted by this guy in a suit, like this kind of Men in Black style guy named Axelrod. And he is told to remote view the moon. And he remote views an alien base on the moon. And he says that he gets it. The whole thing goes crazy. I mean, the book is insane. It's like he then ends up in a supermarket and he says that he senses that this woman at the produce aisle is like an alien or something. But a lot of people from that Stargate program remote viewed, structures on the dark side of the moon and that sort of thing. So,
well, but AJ from the Y Files was on, and he was the one that was telling us that there's photos, right, of the dark side of the moon, that someone had seen photos and was assuming that these would be released shortly, that there were structures. Wow, this is going to be the biggest news ever, and then it was never released.
Are you talking about maybe Karl Wolfe?
Is that what it was?
Who was taken to, this is all his claims, and he died in a freakish bike accident a little after saying this. But he said that there was like in like Langley, Virginia, where a lot of spooky stuff goes on. He was taken to it was like inside a mountain complex, which we definitely, Karl Wolfe, yeah.
That guy bikes?
Yeah, apparently not enough.
That guy could die any time
on a
scooter. So photographs of the 1966 lunar orbiter mission that revealed large base of the moon. Can we hear what he's saying?
It's a 4-minute video.
Just hear a little bit of it.
Scan one section of the moon, then another and another, and then they would get a larger image. So this mosaic then would be put in that contact printer, and that was then a print that was issued to whomever, the press, the scientist, whatever, wherever that was intended to go. So he was showing me how all this worked, and we walked over to one side of the lab, and he said, "By the way, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon." And I said, "Whose?" "What do you mean, whose?" He said, "Yes, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon." And at that point, I became frightened, and I was a little terrified, thinking to myself that if anybody walks in the room now, I know we're in jeopardy, we're in trouble, because he shouldn't be giving me this information. I was fascinated by it, but I also knew that he was overstepping a boundary that he shouldn't be stepping over. And then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings. There were very tall towers and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. So I didn't say any more to him because I was concerned again that somebody was going to come in at any moment, would catch us having this conversation, and we would be in real trouble. I realized that he was telling me this information because he didn't have anybody else to talk to. Now, probably in that laboratory, he was probably one of the few enlisted people, and he was a worker bee. And he had a high-level security clearance, obviously, but he couldn't share that information with anybody else. And in those days, we didn't. When you had your security clearance, you took it seriously. It isn't like today where people don't take these things seriously. We had a different set of morals and ethics and values. That's the way we were raised, and we stayed bound by those agreements. So it was rare that someone would do something like this, but this fellow and I were the same rank. I think he was very distressed. He had the same pallor and demeanor as the scientists outside the room. They were just as concerned as he was, and he needed to discuss it with somebody. So that was the end of it right there. I didn't take it any further than that. I just filed it away. But the interesting thing, every day that I went home, I would think to myself, I can't wait to hear about this on the news, And, so I'd turn on the TV and I'd look at the news to see if they're going to announce, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon, being really naive, And, of course, here it is 30-some years later, and we still haven't heard about it.
Whoa.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah, but then there's the question of disinformation, right? Like, you could conceivably give people a bunch of nonsense and tell them about it, knowing that some of it is going to leak and it's going to and it won't be verified, and it's going to make this whole story seem even more ridiculous and make people less likely or reluctant to study it.
Totally. And in his case, he says that he was in this, mountain base or whatever, where all of the world's nations were working together as part of some collegial UN style space program or whatever. So that to me might be a little, beyond the pale. And I'm glad you made that point, because that is ufology 101. And I've heard you be incredibly exhausted and frustrated at UFO disclosure. And I think that is the reasonable response. It is limited hangouts on limited hangouts. It's just, we're going to give you a little bit, but we're also going to sprinkle in some falsities and some bullshit. We're going to stigmatize it. And it kind of works because it creates this initiation path for recruiting if there are any of these programs. It widens the surface area. It both conditions the populace, but also stigmatizes the thing and makes it seem like kind of a joke. And so I think if you are not viewing modern disclosure through that kind of hermeneutic lens of interpretation, and you're just taking it, accepting it, imbibing it wholeheartedly, prima facie, I think you are in trouble.
Yeah.